Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
Welcome to the Infowars Nightly News. It is Friday, March 6, 2015, and I'm Leanne McAdoo. Here are tonight's top stories.
Tonight, was Netanyahu's speech a cover for executive amnesty? Then, nosy neighbors get a family hit with neglect charges. And someone finally asked Hillary about her emails. That's next on the Infowars Nightly News.
And now the Russians have it all. Enjoy yourself, Hillary. The Russians don't appreciate the jihadis attacking them.
Well, if you are a parent, you may have had the pleasure of sending your child off to school today dressed as a character from one of their favorite books in celebration of World Book Day. Well, an 11-year-old boy from the UK caused quite a stir when he showed up to school dressed as one of the characters from the novel 50 Shades of Grey. Yes, he went to school wearing a gray suit complete with cable ties and an eye mask. And apparently his mom thought that this would be really funny. The school banned him from photographs because they said the costume was inappropriate. You think? Now, his mom said that she was more offended by other students who were dressed up as serial killers. And here she's talking about James Bond and American Sniper. Now, she's the mom of the year because she says she wouldn't have allowed her 8-year-old to dress up like that. But these 11-year-old kids, you know, they're ready for this bondage novel, apparently, because she said all the kids knew who he was. They all thought it was really funny and that it's just the school who was uptight. So I just am astonished with this story because she said all of the 11-year-old kids know who Christian Grey is from this erotic novel that basically glamorizes bondage and domestic violence. So don't children have any better books to read? Jennings, let's go back to the control room. Now, Joe Jennings, you sent your son off to school today in honor of World Book Day. What do you go as?
My son went as Galileo Galilei in full bearded garb.
And then, so is this something normal? So I guess the kids, they dress up and then they give a presentation. Would you have been okay if a student showed up ready to give a book report on 50 Shades of Grey?
Probably not. I don't think that for a 10-year-old that's appropriate.
Right. I mean, even if, I don't know how these kids are getting their hands on this book, but what do you think about what the mom said about some of the kids were dressed up like American Sniper, other ones as James Bond, and they had their toy guns. Obviously, they're in the UK. They're still allowed to bring toy guns to school, but I mean, is it any different?
Well, I mean, my children were instructed, and the children at that school were instructed to pick historical figures. They had a list of historical figures that they had to pick out. And my son picked Galileo because he thought, wow, it was so cool. He discovered planets and the telescope and stuff like that. There were kids that were Washington and stuff like that. Now, maybe in the UK, they got rid of all books and they're just movie characters now. Maybe it was movie character day.
Yeah, books that have been turned into movies, which is pretty surprising because a recent study showed that kids in the UK are actually better with reading than students here in the US. So kind of surprising there that they're going that route. But, you know, meanwhile, back in America, parents are being threatened with child protective services for letting their children walk home alone from the park. Now, we've reported about this story, but now these two parents in Maryland have been charged with unsubstantiated child neglect after they allowed their 10-year-old and 6-year-old to walk home 1 mile from their local playground. Police say they were called after someone spotted the two children making their way home in December in a suburb just outside of Washington, D.C. So, what a good neighbor. Rather than keeping their eye on the kids, they call the police. Now, these charges mean that the case is going to remain in the state's database for 5 years if no further reports are added to the file. The mother, who is a science consultant and a writer, says that she doesn't want there to be a file at all. They should never have been on the radar in the first place. And the parents say that they're going to refuse to allow this case to change their parenting style, which emphasizes independence and trust. And see, that's the big problem, because you can't raise your children to be independent. They have to be dependent on the state, and they can only trust the state. These parents are clearly raising domestic terrorists. Now, they say that they want to appeal, but they've been told that trying to do that could lead to escalated charges of indicated child neglect. So they're basically threatening these parents to snatch away their kids, so they're going to have to keep them locked up in their house rather than allowing them to walk home in Silver Spring, Maryland, which, from what I understand, is actually a pretty nice, affluent neighborhood. Now, some other parents there in D.C. are defying the nanny state. Police refused to lift a sledding ban. So parents there held a sled-in yesterday on America's most famous hill, that's Capitol Hill, which happens to also be a really fantastic spot for sledding. And you can see all of the pictures of that tyranny. If you go to Twitter, it's under #SledFreeOrDie. Now, the police thankfully didn't enforce this ban yesterday, but it's probably because there was cameras everywhere waiting to document if the Capitol Police whipped out their tasers to take down these domestic terrorists, all these children and their parents who were sledding in snow. But what in the world are they thinking, saying that your children belong to the state? What does that even mean? Now, kids, obviously, in the community there in Silver Spring, they don't belong to that community. The neighbor called the cops rather than keeping an eye on the kids. That's what it means when your kids belong to the state. You get the cops called on you, or you set your children up to be ripe for abuse and neglect if they get snatched away by the Child Protective Services. Now, this is according to a new report. This video is featured on Buzzsaw, which is Sean Stone's show. We've had him here today, but it's children taken away from parents by CPS are winding up in the sex trafficking trade.
In Orange County last year, they had a bust for these traffickers. They got 105 people, victims of trafficking, human trafficking. 65% of those victims were wards of Child Protective Services. Not only were they wards of Child Protective Services, but check this out, they were never reported missing.
Now, you might be saying to yourself, oh, that's just in California, or that's really outrageous, and something like that doesn't really happen that often. But there's actually an Arkansas state rep under fire this week. He's tangled up in that same sort of story. This is State Rep Justin Harris and his wife. They adopted 2 girls aged 3 and 6 from their state's Department of Human Services in 2013. He says after just a few months of dealing with some pretty severe behavioral issues of these girls, which is kind of common in newly adopted children, he said he gave them up to a trusted friend. Well, it turns out that trusted friend ended up raping the 6-year-old girl. After that, they then gave them to another set of parents. So this practice is known as rehoming in the adopted community and adopted children. This happens a lot, actually, and this practice is legal and it's quite simple in most states. A child's guardian can sign them over with just a simple power of attorney. So this is how they're getting tangled up in this sex trafficking. They're getting lost in the system. As you saw from that video earlier, they're not even reporting when these children go missing. A lot of times that they say, oh, well, they're 14, 15, 16, you know, they're just runaways. And so they don't report them to the state. They don't keep track of them. They don't even report them to the parents that they snatched them away from. Obviously, of course, sometimes they are taken away from really bad living situations. But in other cases, like the parents who are very good parents, they just let their kids walk home alone. If the state snatches kids away from a loving home like that and then allows them to become targeted by pimps who prey after these kids because they're not being watched after and they're being neglected by their state-appointed guardians. This is a big deal. Now, I did a report, I believe last year. It's called From Foster Care to Prostitution. Check out that video. It's even more in depth. It gets into those cases that happened in California and other states. But this is something that is a big deal. It is going on, and it's being aided and abetted through very high political offices and police and your local law enforcement and all of that. But you need to check it out and do something about it, and at least find out what your elected representatives are doing to, keep track of the kids that are in the system and making sure that CPS is recording. Child Protective Services has the authority to snatch your children directly from your home, a lot of times just arbitrarily over an ego trip. Families might not have the means to fight back against these agencies. So the least that we can do is hold these agencies accountable.
Another major health threat, this one in Toledo, Ohio, where everybody in the entire city has been told not to drink the water.
Ohio's governor declaring a state of emergency.
Did you know that the average person uses about 80 to 100 gallons of water at home every single day? If there's a water emergency, will you be prepared?
Panicked residents forming long lines throughout the day.
We're here at a supermarket in Toledo. You can see the shelves empty where water once was.
To stay safe and healthy during a crisis, you must have access to safe, clean water. Water which will not be available at your local grocery store.
There's a mad dash on right now to stock up on supplies.
The ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system is a must-have for every modern, independently minded household. Protect your family's safety during an emergency. Go to InfoWarsStore.com today to purchase your ProPure Pro 1 G2.0 water filtration system or call 1-888-253-3139.